Cocoon Spawn Girls. Chapter 27. Our running had brought us back to the post office. By my count, it should only be 8 ST. That meant we had made it here 3 minutes quicker than when we had tried the first time when I was keeping count. With every loop, clearly our navigation skills were at least improving. I continued running down the street following Clarice. I wanted to ask where exactly we were headed this time. We had gone this way before and made it into the forest before being sent back. It felt like there wasn't anything in this direction worth heading towards. I had to imagine at some point the hunters are going to get tired of us constantly running. We also had not a single lead on where the other hunter was, the one who could manipulate time somehow. Clarice seemed quiet, like something was off with her that wasn't before we left, but I had no time to ask about it and if she was all right. She led us down the same street we had taken to reach the outskirts of town before, but she turned into a residential area just before the road that led out of town. I was pleased it seemed she had some sort of plan for where she was leading us. It was 17 ST when we reached a house that Clarice had decided to approach. It was a standard 2-floor house with a connected garage. I couldn't see anything about it to make it stand out among the rest of the neighborhood, but Clarice seemed to see something. She tossed a marble in front of her as she ran up the steps of the front door. The marble's gravity ripped the door straight off and tossed it to the side with a loud crash. Clarice caught the marble back in her hand before it even hit the ground. I followed her inside, stepping through the open doorway. She found her way to the kitchen and began digging in cabinets and drawers. "What are we looking for?" I asked via my board. "Alcohol? Gas tanks? Anything flammable," King stated as he eyed each cabinet Clarice was opening. I didn't get why, but I just went along with it and began looking around myself. I ended up heading out to the garage and finding a gas can used for a lawnmower. I brought it back to the kitchen. Clarice had some bottles as well as some matches. "Great find," Clarice smiled as she spotted the can I was carrying. She picked up all the items she had collected and was headed outside, back into the cul-de-sac street. I watched as she sat down on the corner and tossed a marble with all her strength into the air. I stood over her, staring at the floating marble just hovering in the air. I didn't yet see what we were trying to accomplish here. "Start dumping the gas from your can, but make sure to do it outward, like thrust it out so gravity can catch it," Clarice instructed me. I once again just did as she asked. I'm sure she had a good reason for this stuff. Instead of just thrusting the can, I used Fool's Night in my fingers and tore the top half of the can off. Then, with one thrust, the entire contents flung out in front of me. The gas fell slightly in an arch before rising up and being swept up in the pull of Clarice's marble. Clarice poured her alcohol in much the same way, all the liquids just bubbling around the marble. She then took out the matches and began lighting them, then throwing them at the marble's liquid body. Once the first match reached it, there was an ignition of flames. The marble became a fireball of bright flames. "Okay, Sophia, now we're gonna run a little," Clarice said, grabbing my hand and dragging me along down the street from where we came. At 23 ST, we got to the end of the street from the fireball, its brightness still visible in the distance. It was flickering and almost seemed to be shaking from where we were. Then, as if on command, the bottles on the ground began fleeing upward into the fireball. But it wasn't just the bottles. The empty gas can just flew upward as well. And then, the house's removed door, joined by some shingles from the surrounding houses, all began rotating around the fireball as they were slowly dragged along into the flames. Clarice didn't say anything as objects and pieces of the houses began being dragged upward and set ablaze upon contact with the fiery orb. We just stood there watching as it grew in size and scope. It never rose higher, only widening itself. Before long, there were bits of flaming house touching the ground in this large ball of a house fire. 7 houses disappeared as pieces were dragged upward and even down the street to become part of this mess, just vanishing as the fire grew larger. "Okay, we can start moving further back now," King told Clarice. She looked over to me. "Be on guard. They can't have not noticed this, so we'll have company pretty soon." I pulled out my board again. Why wouldn't they just reset time to before the fire started if it's a problem? "I don't think they care that much about the fires. What they will care about is this is a direct challenge against them, that we're done just running." I made an, "Oh," face. I hadn't realized it had become time to fight already. I wish one of them had told me. And when had they discussed it? I'd been here the whole time, and yet I don't feel like I ever saw them allude to this. Something seemed a bit off. We backtracked all the way back to the post office. It was now 38 ST. The fireball of houses now dragged along in all directions, pulling in not just the rest of the neighboring houses, but trees and dirt. Even clouds far above the ground had begun to curl and circle the large ball of fire. Clarice grabbed my hand and brought me inside the post office. It appeared just as I remembered it from the previous loops. Of course my drawing from before was no longer here. Clarice dragged a chair from behind a desk over to me and then sat me down. It was as strange as it sounds. I tilted my head, expressing I was confused by her actions. I reached for my board when Clarice finally spoke up again. Those clone spawns are going to be here real soon. They're going to be easily drawn in by the movements of the flames and the buildings my orb is dragging in. She stated it like she knew it to be true. But how could she be so sure? There's another thing, she began. Sophia, listen. Tiki's going to be drawn in as well. Any flame is going to draw her never-ending flaming heart to it, especially one as massive as what we just created. I shot up from my chair. Tiki's coming? Clarice motioned me to sit back down. I know this has all been fairly odd for you, and that it all must seem crazy, but I need you to understand why I know this is all certain. She placed her face into her hands without King. King reached over and petted her head. Just a little more, he said to her in a soothing voice. I leaned forward and reached out to her, trying to join in comforting her, despite not knowing what was going on. She took a deep breath and returned to sitting up straight. Sophia, I'm sorry, this is all just a lot for me, honestly. But we don't have time for me to keep flopping all over the place with this. Gosh, I'm sure this is all going to be even harder on you when it's your turn. I held up my arms, shaking them with frustration. What are you talking about? Her eyes suddenly locked onto mine, and with the most pained look she uttered, Sophia, you died last loop. We sat there in silence for a moment. I just sat there not sure what words out of her mouth could have meant. She just sat there watching me, waiting for me to see what I would say. I don't remember that, I held up on my board. I could tell when we suddenly jumped back to outside Dawn's spot, and you weren't screaming about having lost your head. I lost my head? I frantically scribbled. Clarice held a hand out to her mouth, as if she was trying to stop herself from vomiting. I can still taste the puke I let out when I watched that spawn eat from your headless neck. Clarice looked like she might begin to cry. King rose upward, taking over the talking. Do you remember when we antagonized Dawn to try to kill us? Well, the loop after that, she did, and the clones were far more combative. I shook my head. No, this is the loop after that. You just don't remember. That's what we're trying to tell you, King sighed. And at least you got to prepare for that. If Dawn's words hold true, she plans to only kill Clarice and then reset time after making you watch it all happen. I sat there in disbelief. This whole time I thought at least our memories could be trusted to know how long we've been in the hunting game. But now... Was it my first time dying? I said. King only shook his head and sighed. We can't be sure if all three of us have died in any loops. I now understood the somber energy I had felt from before. You've both been holding that in this whole time? They nodded in a somber motion. I can't imagine what it must have been like for that moment to see your dead friend, and then the next to suddenly see them unaware of what had just happened. I realized this might be something I'll have to experience real soon. So what happened last loop? I asked. Clarice sighs. Well, it was about what you'd expect for the most part. We headed towards the area where we had spotted signs of EGV approaching. That's when we found Tiki. She paused, reliving those moments that to her felt like they hadn't happened even an hour ago. Tiki seemed to, on some level, be responding to something EVD was doing. King spoke up in Clarice's silence. She began burning large areas of trees as if to signal back at them. And all that fire didn't just draw her attention. It also drew in countless clone spawn. Clarice looked a little jittery now. She wasn't shaking, but her eyes seemed as if they were vibrating as she continued recounting what had happened. They crowded around Tiki as she stood there, growling on all fours. She hadn't seemed to go any further in her transformation since we last saw her. I suspect this wasn't her first time facing the clones. I was relieved to hear Tiki was still doing all right out there. Even better if we know which sector of the town she'd be in. But then, why was Clarice trying to draw her out in the opposite direction? After Tiki killed a few of her attackers, she seemed to regain some of herself. Her eyes looked much more aware of what was going on around her. I think she's not too far from being back with us again. But her seeming better is what ended up getting you killed. Clarice shuddered. It was as if a chilly breeze passed over her. What got me killed? You seemed to let your guard down after Tiki looked at you. You got too excited and didn't even see a clone spawn leap right at you from behind. Clarice gripped some of her hair as she grabbed the sides of her head. I did try and stop it. I really did. But it wasn't enough time. And then, well, She trailed off. King shook his head in a disappointed fashion. They tore your heads clean off, Sophia, then licked up chemicals leaking from your neck, like you were a loose water tap. I took a large gulp as I sat back down. Dang. I hate to hear I went out like that. It does sound like the kind of thing I would do, admittedly. I'm kind of glad I don't have to remember dying in such a terribly painful and embarrassing way. And then what happened? The loop ended not too long after that. Mostly we just kept fighting Spawn as they were drawn to the burning forest. I nodded. At least now I was fully caught up on where we were now. So what is your plan now? Why are we luring Tiki here? Oh, she exclaimed. Sorry, I forgot. I want Tiki to help draw out wherever this hiding hunter is. I feel confident she has to be in this sector of town. I just don't know where. I had hoped that expanding Fireball would force her out, unless she wants to become barbecue inside it. So all of this was just to try and locate the final missing piece on the board. We know where Dawn is at OST, and assuming she stays there for the entire count until 20 ST, Tiki is somewhere near the River Forest exit of town, and beyond that is where EVG is charging towards town. So where was the final piece, the second hunter, and the other half of Artemis's bliss? Look, Sophia, Clarice spoke to me. The only way out of this is if we kill the time user. I've thought it over as many possibilities as I can, and I don't think we leave here unless we kill the time user first. She held up a finger. As long as the time user's around, we can't make any progress towards any other goal. We can't bring back Tiki. We can't reach EGV. Can't kill Dawn. Can't run. She held up a second finger. If we kill Dawn, there's nothing stopping her clones from just killing us. Even if they don't, the time user can just reverse time and Dawn won't fall for the same trick again. She held up a third finger. We can't gain any new info. If any time we learn something they don't really want us to know, they can just kill us before reversing time. A fourth finger joined the other. And 4, I'm getting really tired of being sent back over and over. She smirked. Let's focus on killing the time user. And step 1 of that is smoking her out of her hiding space, so we can continue to return to it every loop she throws at us. I threw my fist into the air in agreement. She joined me in my rally, throwing her own fist up. King joined us after an eye roll, but he did join, as all 3 fists held up firmly in the center, united. Let's get moving, ladies. I'd like to get the jump on this hunter before she's smoked out and has to be on the run. We nod and head out of the post office. Clarice steps ahead of me as I pause to pick up my marker that had rolled across the floor after I put it down from the last message. I rescue it and scoop it up into my bag, jogging back up to Clarice as she walks out the door. I push the door as it closes behind her, as I step out into the street, just as King utters the words, Shoot! I pause my step as I watch in confusion as Clarice stumbles backwards, almost tripping on her own feet as she heads towards me in reverse. I instinctively take a step back myself, unsure of what's going on. Clarice steps to the side, turning slightly. I could now see there was a small rod sticking out of her chest. I grab her arm and pull her towards me as I recognize the rod as an arrow. I hadn't even pulled her yet before the zipping sound flew at us with a second arrow slamming into Clarice's forehead. She finally looked at me, still not having said a single word since she got shot. Her mouth opened, lips quaking as she was trying to find the words to say anything at all. And then she slumped over towards me, falling face downward, plopping down in the doorway. I let out a scream, unhearable to anything at all. My vocal cords, even in such sorrow, could not allow me even a flicker of sound. I dropped to my knees, scooping up Clarice's head into my lap. The arrow still protrudes from her forehead. I try gently to pull it out, but it seems well and deep in there, and not willing to budge. There was blood coming from her chest arrow. It had pooled under her as she lay on her stomach. I wanted so desperately to begin swiping it all back into her. Had this been what it was like for her to watch me die? My tears had begun joining the blood across the entranceway. They flowed out of me at such a rate I could barely see without continuously wiping my eyes. Sophia! A familiar voice called my name from above me. Teary eyes, I look up for the first time from Clarice's lifeless, cooling body. Standing over me, or rather floating over me, was King. We have to move her, Sophia. Our second hunter may be our killer. We have to collect as many details as we can about her. Anything we can use for the next loop. I wanted to ask how he was doing that. He's a puppet. How is he floating? What was he if not Clarice's strange outlet for more of her crude thoughts? I wanted to scream. What are you? No time for thoughts of anything but the mission, Sophia. On your feet! On your feet! Now! He screamed at me. I look at him with shaky eyes, tears still streaming down my face. I slowly curved my palms and turned them to touch knuckle, the sign for how. Then I began raising my hand to point at him, for you, but he shouted before I could finish. "I don't know what that means, Sophia," he said in such a scarily harsh tone I had never heard him talk in before. I began to tear up more from his harsh words. His little hands moved to his face as he took a deep breath. "Look, I'm sorry for roughing you, and the harsh tone. I just don't like seeing Clarice like this. I need us to focus on catching that hunter, so he reverses time and Clarice is back." I wiped my tears. I guess it was just as hard for him to see her as it was for me. Perhaps worse. She was his best friend, I would imagine. Well, they did everything together. Went everywhere together. I'd never really considered just what sort of relationship they had. I slowly climb off the entranceway floor and back onto my feet. King's floating outward, pointing with his right hand to the left while facing me. "The arrow came from that direction. Activate Fool's Knight fully and charge that way." I again pointed at him to try and ask what he was going to do. He seemed to be able to tell what I was asking this time. "I'm going to stay by her side until the loop resets," he coughed. "I can't let her be alone for even a second. An old promise we made a long time ago. You go. I know you'll do fine." He floated down to her face. Using his green fingerless hand, he closed her eyelids one after the other. Backed by the bright glow of the burning star of a fireball that crept even closer, I took off running in that direction I was instructed. I had pain and rage building in me that I hoped I could lash out on this hunter who dared to put an arrow in my friend. But I've got to hold back. I need her to fully reset time one more time at least, so Clarice is back. Then we can fully kill her. I nodded to myself as I raced down the road, searching for the signs of them. End of chapter 27.